remember the people that have gone to jail for it, and to make sure that there's room and space for them to participate in this industry as well. So I encourage you to look up Off the Record, where you'll find more information on National Expungement Week. If you're going to be taking pictures or images, you can use the hashtag National Expungement Week. And I'm very, very excited today because we have a really amazing event ahead of us. We're going to be having a wonderful debate with the two district attorney candidates, Michael Maloney and Rachel Rollins. And then we'll also have a really great presentation by the law firm Wilson Elster that will let us know what exactly does expungement and record sealing look like. And maybe this doesn't apply to you, but you can use this information to then give it to somebody else that it does apply to. So, without further ado, before we get to those two, we're going to be listening to two very important and beautiful speakers that will talk about why this event is important to them. So I would like to come and introduce Irving. Thank you, Irving.
Enlightened and well-respected journalists apparently think the issue of blackface is benign. We hardly blink an eye to gun violence of any kind. Nationalist terrorism is excused due to race. This is the reason why I felt the need to talk today. Like, everyone needs to get involved. In the middle of the 20th century, our prison rate was about 110 per 100,000. Today, we have more people incarcerated than any point in history. An autocratic country like Russia locks people up at about 450 per 100,000. I know you're all thinking, wow, they're kind of evil like that, right? But in good old America, we're crushing it. We imprison about 700 per 100,000. To add a little bit more context to this, China, they have a population about 4 times as much as we do, right? We have 500,000 more souls incarcerated in China. Right now, if you're over there, you don't have a free internet. You know, they'll kidnap you if you're Muslim, apparently, re-education. But we have 500,000 more people locked up than over there. An economist at the University of Chicago in the early 2000s, he did a study. He came to the conclusion that the prison term doubled for possession of drugs. It tripled for drug distribution and quintupled for a non-aggravated assault. As a result of this deviant social engineering, jail became the new norm and inherent risk for marginalized people of our society. If we are a supposedly moral and just people, how can we allow this stain on our consciousness? In a world of fake news, it is imperative that we look into the deep, dark void that is the prison industrial complex. Only by doing so can we exercise our demons and move ahead. Having a criminal record is akin to having a scarlet letter. It is essentially punishing someone perpetually. Now try to think you're going through life, the most horrible act you ever committed hanging over your head. Now, try to picture every interaction being affected by it, like getting a job, dating, meeting new people, or even trying to rent or buy a home. The current expungement bill won't help people like me move forward. Isn't it about time we got honest about change? If you're a Republican, it makes sense economically. If you're a Democrat, morally, we have a lot more in common than we'd like to think. People on the extremes seem to be pushing the argument. Basically, I've been through a lot through life, and I didn't make, the best decisions, but I've lived up to it. I don't understand why, if you do something, we're like a just society, a Christian society, why you keep getting punished for the same thing? It doesn't make sense to me. I think there's an agenda there, and people need to look into that. That's it. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Irvin. Now I want to take a minute to introduce Niabim Kinchosh. How many of you have heard the song Legalize It? So this is the daughter of the man who created that. Thank you.
Thank you all for having me. And my father was the ambassador for the Legalize It movement. I actually come today to share a different story that has affected my family. And a story that's near and dear. Some of you have probably heard of it in the news. But and it connects to kind of why expungement I think is really important. We hear, criminals and convicts and all of this terminology that kind of separates families, the families that are affected by this judicial system. And so in 2013, my story actually doesn't take place in Suffolk County. It's actually New Jersey, but it's very, very much relevant because it's a reflection of other families' stories who haven't been told. And so in 2013, my brother, Jawara, was arrested for cannabis possession in New Jersey. It was Father's Day weekend, and he actually didn't have a hearing until about 3 months later. On that day, my mom, my brother's partner, and myself, we drove 4 hours to New Jersey to be by his side. When we got there, we sat in a courtroom to see my brother for the first time in an orange jumpsuit, shackles on his ankles, wrists, and to hear prosecutors tell us that they wanted to offer him 20 years in prison. My brother had never been arrested before. He was a father of 4, he is a father of 4, and a Rastafarian, and an advocate for legalization, as my father is. And he declined that day, and then 3 months later made bail. He went back and forth to New Jersey for 4 years for just pretrial motions. And in December of 2016, he actually accepted a plea. He wanted to get a lot of this behind him. He was with a woman at the time who was also facing 20 years, ironically, in such a weird way. But he turned himself in 2018, in January. A month later, I got a call from my mom. She was frantic on the phone. She had a surgeon on the phone with her. The surgeon said, "We need to do a life-saving procedure on your brother and on your son. He's been attacked in jail, and he suffered a severe brain injury." We rushed to the airport, jumped on a plane, and got to the hospital. My brother was incapacitated. He had handcuffs on his ankles, police surrounding his room. Almost watching him, and it was almost watching him as if it was some sort of entertainment. It was weird. It was, we felt like we were National Geographic. There was no sympathy. We were all in tears. And it was a moment that has changed our lives forever. We fought tooth and nail to get him released. We were able to get him released in the hospital. We were able to kind of get that handcuff that they said was just policy. They also told us, before that, they told us it's policy that we don't allow family to visit. So if your loved one is actually hurt in jail, and it doesn't matter if you're in New Jersey or in Massachusetts, if your loved one is hurt in jail, they don't allow visitation. So if they fail to do their job and keep your family members safe, that's something that is policy. Fortunately, with the platform that my family has, we were able to really fight to get him released. In February of this year, he actually had the charges just dismissed on his birthday, ironically enough. And so I tell this story on this day and during this week because these are the families that are affected. We have a platform where I can share my story, but there's so many others that do not. There's so many people and fathers and sons and mothers and daughters that are affected by the laws and by our system. And so when we look at expungement and who that really helps, although it cannot erase, the time that families have spent dealing with the system or the hurt that they have felt from the system, it does at least help in some ways to get them a part of their lives back. My brother still is unable to do anything for himself. And so he still isn't bed rest, still needs a lot of support, but we're fighters. And so although doctors can say what they want to say, my family continues to fight. And in an event like this and during Expungement Week, we think that it's important that we all continue to fight for those that can't fight for themselves. If you aren't affected, this was my first time. I was privileged to not have a bunch of family members in and out of the prison system. But it wasn't until my family faced this and understood how affected, how this really does affect and break down families. So we shared our story today, and I thank you so much for having us. But Expungement Week is it's more than just a week. It's for everyone to kind of show up and be voices for those that can't speak for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to start the debate. This is going to be moderated by Joseph Gilmore, and I'm going to hand it over to them. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. We are still waiting for, actually, Ms. Rollins is here now. So without further ado, for many of you that don't know what the district attorney does, they are very much involved with who goes to jail and who doesn't go to jail. And in the past 10 years, in Suffolk County, that position has gone unchallenged. So for the first time, we have a chance to decide who is going to oversee justice in our communities. And this is a very important race for us to be a part of as the community. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Rachel Rollins. Next, I am going to introduce Michael Maloney. So we're going to start with Rachel, and she's just just going to give a brief, a bit about her platform, so she can talk about why we should vote for her for Suffolk County DA.
Sure. I'm Rachel Rollins. Thank you so much for having me. I'm running for DA because the system doesn't work the same for everyone. Overwhelmingly, if you are poor, the system does not work as well for you if you are wealthy. And that is the biggest group of people that are disproportionately impacted by the criminal justice system. Second is people of color, usually. And so as a person myself, who's been a lawyer for 21 years, who has been a prosecutor, a criminal defense attorney, a civil rights lawyer, I feel I'm qualified to do the job, but I also have siblings that have cycled in and out of the criminal justice system, struggled with addiction, and as a result of that, I'm the guardian of 2 of my nieces. These are lived experiences that I'll bring to work with me every single day. I believe that we deserve a district attorney that is committed to the role and is passionate about people that haven't had a voice for a very, very long time. In Massachusetts, in Suffolk County, crime is down, what we hear the mayors and the commissioners, the police chief saying, but our racial disparities with respect to who we're incarcerating is up. In Massachusetts, right now, according to the FBI, there's a 216 study that shows that we're #1 in hate crimes. If you've watched the news today, there's a terrible incident that just happened at a synagogue where several people were killed, including members of law enforcement. We have significant issues here that need to be spoken about specifically, spoken out loud, and the racial disparities are overwhelming. We, with respect to population, make up people of color about 17% of the population, 50% of the incarcerated individuals. So these are conversations that make people uncomfortable, but we need to be able to speak about these disparities because in particular with cannabis, many of the people that are currently serving time that we're talking about expungement are people of color and poor people. And we now have a $1 billion industry that people are making lots of money off of, and there were some barriers to entry with respect to people of color. We're lucky in Massachusetts that our enabling statute for cannabis has really good language in it about communities that were disproportionately impacted with the war on drugs. So we're lucky there. I do have a tie to the Cannabis Control Commission. I was offered the position of Chief of Investigations and Enforcement and decided not to take that in order to run for DA. So I'm aware of some of this work that's happening here, but I'm excited to start a conversation. Thank you.
And actually, since we have a time restraint, we're actually going to ask a couple questions for Rachel first, and then we're going to allow Michael to give his platform too. So first, we're just going to start off with a question. One of the biggest contrasts between your administration, Ms. Rollins, and your opponent...
It's Rollins.
Ms. Rollins, I'm sorry.
You can just call me Rachel.
Rachel, one of the biggest contrasts between your administration and your opponent, Mr. Maloney, is your decision not to prosecute small crimes, including drug possession with intent to distribute, minor driving offenses, including operating with a suspended or revoked license, shoplifting, trespassing, and resisting arrest. Maloney argues letting small stuff go welcomes and even encourages nefarious behavior. So what is your response to this, and what would your approach be to addressing these small offenses?
Yeah, so I think I've actually prosecuted before. So my 21 years as a lawyer, I've been a prosecutor. So what I say is, as a prosecutor, we usually have one tool, and that tool is incarceration. Accountability does not have to equal incarceration. You can hold people accountable with different things, right? So what I want to do is with those petty quality of life crimes, I don't believe in the broken windows theory at all. I believe it disproportionately impacts people of color and poor people, and data show that. So that's another distinguishing factor between us as well. There are several others, but we'll focus on this. So for me, we are spending a lot of time and a lot of resources on petty quality of life crimes. We're sending people to jail where it costs $50,000 to house them in the Suffolk County House of Correction. That's costing us money as taxpayers here. And overwhelmingly, the things on my list are crimes of poverty, mental illness, and addiction, which we criminalize every day. In the last 2 to 3 weeks, we've had 8 homicides in Boston. Only 2 arrests have been made with respect to those 8 homicides. There are violent, serious crimes and limited resources. What I want to do is focus our resources on violent, serious crimes and not as many resources on the petty quality of life crimes that are clogging up our system every day. People will surely be held accountable, but accountability does not equal jail every time. And very candidly, if you're mentally ill or suffering from an addiction or struggling with addiction, accountability isn't even the right word to be using in response to that. I don't want to hold you accountable because you have cancer. I don't want to hold you accountable because you're mentally ill. I want to get you treatment. And that's what I'm focusing on, is getting diversion services, getting social workers to help us with issues we have. Because guys, we have a 67% recidivism rate in Massachusetts, meaning we send people to jail, they come out, and at a 67% rate, they're cycling back in and out of the system. And remember, 95% of the people we send to jail come back. So we have a problem. I'm proposing a solution. I'm really proud of the fact that the New Yorker, the Washington Post, the AP, President Barack Obama, there's a lot of people that think we're coming up with great solutions and are excited about these proposed changes, but change is hard and people are uncomfortable about it, and these are going to start some really important conversations about how we're going to see, we're going to change the system.
The next question is, so our speaker, Irving, he mentioned how the current expungement provisions do not go far enough. They're not going to help the people that were intended to help. So in cities like San Francisco and San Diego, automatic expungement policies have been implemented for marijuana offenses, eliminating the process for offenders that, so they're not subject to have to go through that legal process. Are you in favor of automatic expungement for marijuana crimes, and would you be in support of reducing eligibility restrictions on expungement, such as the age restriction, you have to be under 21, and we'll get into that in the presentation.
Yes, I'm in full support of that. I feel like if things are legal now and people are reaping the benefits of that, then we should be expunging those crimes from the past. Number one, it's an incredibly complicated system. There's articles out there about these, many of the people that have these crimes on their record. You need to get a lawyer. You need to, it's overwhelmingly complicated, even in Massachusetts, with respect to how you get your records expunged. And so I think it should be easier, and I'm fine with making sure that we are vocal as the next DA about making this as easy as possible. I don't think people should reap the benefit of something going forward when there are people that still have the stain or the brand of a criminal record. And there's interesting things happening. If you have felonies in some other parts, they become misdemeanors as opposed to expungement. So we can look around the country to see what's happening in New Jersey and several other places that are thinking creatively about expungement. There's many other places as well. So yes, I'm in favor of that.
Our next question is, in states like California, we've seen an uptick in raids and crackdowns on illicit cannabis businesses. Mr. Maloney has pledged not to prosecute marijuana crimes. How will your administration work to proactively address issues with marijuana enforcement and other non-violent crimes?
So I don't own any companies in the marijuana industry, so there's ethical issues. I think if you own companies in an industry and then you're going to be overseeing that industry, I don't have any such ethical questionable behavior. What I can tell you is the voters have spoken, and with respect to medicinal and recreational use, but if there are raids that are happening based on other violations, so wage theft or other things, I can't make a blanket statement to say the marijuana industry is off limits. If there are things that are happening in that industry that are illegal or unlawful, we'll look at that then, but the voters have spoken and said that medicinal and recreational use are legal, and I will support what it is that the voters have said. But I think there are many different ways that an industry can violate the law, and if it is taking advantage of workers, not paying them, not complying, I know there are issues with mold or other things like that. I don't know whether they'd rise to the level of the DA's office looking into this, but there's lots of different ways that the Cannabis Control Commission is regulating industry. But I will openly state that the voters have made it clear that this is what they want, and I will support that.
The last question we have is, you mentioned that the recidivism rate for Boston, was it, or for Suffolk County, was 67%. So it's a very high percentage of people going to jail, going back into the system. It's like a cycle. What is your plan to help reduce that recidivism rate?
So what I proposed is actually speaking to people, actually pausing the system and saying, what is happening here? I think we have a conveyor belt in the criminal justice system where it's going by 60 miles an hour and the end is jail. We don't look at one case at a time. We're not asking people what are the root causes of the problems of why you're here. Part of why my proposed solution with respect to just these 15 is looking at these issues and trying to get wraparound services for people so that when we go to the root cause of why you are shoplifting or engaging in this behavior and we get you the treatment you need, you no longer come back into this system, right? So we also need to, when we hear the story about, and I'm sorry to hear that about your brother, but we hear incidents happening in our House of Corrections, in our Department of Corrections, that are incredibly troubling. And those individuals, when they return to our community, because as I said before, 95% of the people we send away come back. If they're being beaten, if they're being placed into populations with people that are more violent than them, if we have reduced services and they're not getting counseling, they're not getting training, they're not getting any help with many of the issues that they're struggling with, how can we be surprised when they re-enter our community and are more violent, less social, more agitated, and engaging in crimes? We need to really look at the system and walk through and see how we're going to change things.
Thank you, Rachel Rollins.
Thank you so much for having me.
Next, sorry, one second. So Rachel's actually going to step out. She has to go to another event. But next up, we are going to introduce Mr. Michael Maloney, and he's going to give a little bit about his platform, about why we should vote for him for Suffolk County DA.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Rachel, before you leave, I want to make sure you're here so I can tell you this and look you in the eye. I want to say it. When you talk about your experience, you are exaggerating. You may have been a defense attorney, you may have been a prosecutor, but I'm fortunate, and thank you for hosting this debate. Your experience is such where you've never actually had a trial. You're talking about criminal experience as a prosecutor from over 20 years ago for less than 6 months. I have been practicing for 10 years in this industry. I have been working with individuals at some of the most challenging points in their life for a decade. I had to take time off from this campaign 2 separate times to represent people in superior court trials. I know this industry inside and out, and guys, I'm not here to talk about you. I'm here to talk about why I am the better candidate. National Expungement Week means a tremendous amount to me. I hear these stories about people falling into the criminal justice system for an array of reasons. And these individuals need to be held accountable. And they should be held accountable. But when the system in Massachusetts precludes individuals or makes it so incredibly difficult for them to walk away from the collateral repercussions of that choice, of that decision, of that mistake, or as an action made while they were under the influence because of an addiction, because of something that happened in their family, because their heart was broken, they weren't thinking clearly, because fill in the blank, everyone has a reason. And people do need to be held accountable. I've been screaming for expungements since I started advocating for people as a defense attorney 10 years ago. And I gotta tell you, I'm 38 years old right now. I grew up in Plainville, which is a pretty small town just north of the Rhode Island border. I've been living in and around Boston for the entirety of my life with a brief stint in New York City. But I say that because in the town where I grew up in, cannabis was pretty taboo. And I took that with me into this industry when I started. But representing individuals over and over and over that were suffering from addiction, that were suffering from mental health, that were suffering, that would leave the court and go and use a needle, that would leave the court and go and take a pill. And then some of these individuals, some of them would say, Mike, attorney-client privilege. The judge says I can't smoke pot, but yes, it does help. It kills the physical symptoms. It really does provide some medical benefit. I tell you what, the first time I heard it, I said, no way. To hell with that. I didn't believe it. Then I heard it again. And again, and again, and again. And at some point, it registered. And it started to click. And then something called Article 12 happened in late 2011, early 2012. And that's actually when I was, yes, Rachel, I have been fortunate. I played very, very aggressively about 7 years ago, and I made a decision when people told me I was going to lose my law license for advocating for cannabis patients. I saw the medical benefit and I challenged the law. And that's what criminal justice reform is all about. I am about second chances. I have been my entire career. I can tell you to this very day, some of my best employees, some of my best contractors are individuals with horrible, horrible records. But they looked me in the eye. They owned their past, they owned their mistake, and they said, I've turned a corner, give me a chance, and I am proud to employ those individuals. I too have made mistakes, but I believe in second chances, and that's why I'm running.
Thank you, Michael. So in a recent tweet,
I get to, if you're going to tell me that I didn't do something, you don't have to hit me though. Thank you.
He hands
So-
you the microphone, let's be clear. Hold on. Let's be
Aggressive.
clear.
Yeah.
Okay, go on. You have an event, right?
So I am. I'm actually getting an award at the NAACP, but because I was asked or challenged, my career, I've been a lawyer for 21 years, and you can Google it. I have been a federal prosecutor for 7 of those years and have handled very large cases with John Wortman, Glenn McKinley. These are names that you can Google. They're all supporting our campaign. Handled cases in Suffolk County. I've clerked on the Mass Appeals Court. My record speaks for itself, and that wasn't 20 years ago. But I wish you the best. And additionally, I do agree that people deserve second chances. That's why we're here. I also think that it's important that you're honest about what it is my background is. We can disagree, but I've been a lawyer for 21 years. So 20 years ago that didn't happen. We can disagree, but you're not going to be factually inaccurate. So I wish you the best. You can Google my resume.
And one more time, my question was, have you ever had a jury trial, Rachel?
I most certainly have.
Thank you. Next question.
Best of luck, guys. Thank you.
thank you guys. So Michael, in a recent tweet, you pledged not to prosecute marijuana crimes, period. And that's a pretty big claim. A lot of us here come from the cannabis world. So could you just explain how you would bypass the legislation in place that criminalizes marijuana offenses such as the sale, distribution, public consumption of marijuana?
Thank you for the question. I have challenged the status quo since I got involved in this industry. And I'll tell you right now that marijuana will not be prosecuted under my administration. It will not happen. Now listen, hypothetically, medical, recreational, it serves an array of benefits. But let me tell you right now, hypothetically, if there was an egregious circumstance, if you want to throw the hypothetical over the top, here's what I would do. I would fine that individual into bankruptcy. The person's not going to be charged in the criminal court. My job as prosecutor is to protect the community, and that's exactly what I will do. I'm not a Democrat, I am not a Republican, I'm not beholden to any party. I'm just common sense. And to prosecute and to burden the judicial system with a cannabis charge is ludicrous. Not only is it the wrong thing to do, financially it is totally, totally inefficient. Aside from the fact that individuals are actually benefiting from this product, it's the right thing to do. They will be fined. That's it.
Thank you. So your opponent, your opponent Rachel has previously stated that she's a non-believer of the broken window theory. So why do you feel it's necessary to prosecute small crimes like shoplifting, resisting arrest, and trespassing?
People need to be held accountable. Again, I am not looking to burden someone with a criminal record. I am really not. And forget about what I'm saying right now. Look at my actions over the past 10 years. I've been helping people at some of the lowest points in their life. When I was 19, I was using a fake ID. I got in trouble. Everyone has backstories. Everyone has I know that's nothing. That is a small incident. But I'm telling you, the issue is I was held accountable. Individuals need to be held accountable. If you let the small stuff go, it will have collateral consequences and crime will get worse. Never mind the fact that we are running for the top prosecutorial job in the county. The job is to protect. The job is not to be a social justice warrior. I am running to protect the community.
Thank you, Mike. So based on past allegations with your wife and domestic violence, how will you ensure the public that you won't allow your emotional state to cloud your decision-making when you become Suffolk County District Attorney?
Thank you for the question. That's a question I've actually got quite a bit. I have owned my mistake. There are things I have said, there are things that I have done that I wish I could take back. When my heart was broken, and that is not an excuse, it is not an excuse, but when my heart was broken, I acted out of emotion. I did not get into this campaign, not for a split second, thinking that my past would not catch up with me. But I've said this before, and again, thank you for asking me, because I gotta tell you, as an independent, it is really, really difficult to get one's message out there. No one wanted to talk to me during the primary. I got turned away at half a dozen different debates when I walked to the door. I tell you about what happened when I was 19, not because I'm trying to chuckle, but this is the same thing I was saying 7 months ago. I'm an open book, guys. I don't have anything to hide. My former wife has made herself available to the press, supports me. My former in-laws support me. I have paid an enormous emotional price for the decision I made when I was heartbroken. I would ask people to look past that and judge me for who I am as a person, not based on an isolated incident from 5 years ago.
You. How has working as a criminal defense attorney in the cannabis industry changed your perspective on criminal justice reform?
I actually think marijuana goes to the absolute bare bone essence of criminal justice reform. I mean, you talk about the absolute essence of criminal justice reform. It's really sad that the laws of justice, the judicial system is really slow to catch up to society, to catch up to common sense. I mean, you look at right now, my opponent was talking about the Cannabis Control Commission. For those of you that are aware, Shailene Title is doing a bang-up job, doing everything in her power to help facilitate this industry progressing. As a criminal defense attorney, I have been at the forefront of this industry. I've been involved with the transition from Article 12 to medicalization to recreation. And I've been pushing the envelope across the board. Not because I'm looking to start a fire, not because I think it's really fun, because it's the right thing to do. Because regardless of where you are in the political spectrum, left, right, down the middle, it doesn't matter. Common sense says people are benefiting from this product. Common sense says the justice system has to catch up. So in regards to your question, marijuana and criminal defense, I gotta tell you, I got really lucky that I just happened to be at the right age when this whole thing was transitioning. But it was a very aggressive move 6.5, 7 years ago. And I am really glad I made that decision because I've been fortunate enough to help a lot of people. And that's exactly what I will do as district attorney.
Thank you. All right, next we are going to bring out two special guests. They are attorneys at law. Are they around here? Mr. Blake Mensing and Kara Torkelson. They're going to be giving a presentation on the Massachusetts expungement laws. And just so that everybody knows, the Criminal Justice Reform Bill was signed into law this year by Governor Baker, and he added some provisions in that would allow for the expungement of certain crimes. And this presentation is just going to let you know how you qualify and if you're eligible, so that you can spread the word to anybody who needs this sort of assistance. So without further ado,
hello everybody. So I'm going to provide some context here before Kara gets into the nuts and bolts. So obviously we're talking about National Expungement Week. Let's define that word. It's not a sexy word, it sort of doesn't roll off the tongue. What expungement means is it's a tabula rasa. It's wiping the slate entirely clean. There are sealing provisions that allow a record to not see the public light, though the contents of someone's record would still be accessible to officials at the state level. Expungement is an eraser. It completely eliminates a conviction from one's record. And why is this important? Obviously, we're at the tip of the spear in the Massachusetts cannabis industry, the first state legalized for adult use east of the Mississippi. And one of the underpinnings of the statute here is that restorative social justice and social equity have to be at the forefront. So there are statutory provisions that have now been implemented in the regulations to make this a just and level playing field for people seeking to enter into this industry. Obviously, a criminal conviction will follow one for many, many years, and it impacts one's ability to get a job, housing, a loan. It takes a psychological toll. People you've become other by having a conviction in your past. So, as a cannabis attorney, it's incredibly important to me to see people who were wronged by the failed drug war have a chance to strip away that label, that scarlet letter. Especially in light of the fact that federal prohibition of cannabis is absolutely, indisputably based on a history of racial animus. Back in the early 1900s, the Mexican Revolution led to a bunch of refugees coming from Mexico over into the United States. This probably sounds eerily familiar now, but people got really upset and said, oh, this is scary. So cannabis is the plant's name. In the early 1900s, folks were calling it marijuana to associate it with Mexican refugees and Mexican immigrants. That's a foreign sounding word. Oh, it's scary, marijuana. So shortly thereafter, in the 1930s, the Marijuana Tax Act came about. There was congressional testimony on the floor that was 100% bald-faced lie, saying, basically exactly stating the opposite of what conclusions of studies said about the consequences of using this substance. Then in the 1940s, 1944, Fiorello LaGuardia, the mayor of New York, commissioned a similar study to try to figure out what does cannabis use do to people? What happens? That report basically said, on the scale of things that are human vices, this is not so bad. Obviously, in the 1970s, we had President Nixon who enacted and signed the Controlled Substances Act. There was a report called the Schaefer Commission Report, and that was a study, again, on what is bad about cannabis. And the conclusion of that was, again, this is not that bad. Nixon said, I don't like that. That's not true. It's bad. People are bad into it. You got Attorney General Jeff Sessions who says no good people use cannabis. Obviously, that's not true. So that's sort of the backdrop. The other portion, the legal definition of a Controlled Substance Act Schedule 1 is that a substance has a high potential for abuse and no recognized medical benefit. The federal government, the Department of Health and Human Services, holds a patent on cannabinoids for medical purposes. So the hypocrisy is offensive to me intellectually. It's offensive to society. you can't lie to people and say, oh, we're the federal government, we know what's best for you. That just really sticks in my craw. So, yes, it sticks in my craw. So, obviously, we've just seen our neighbors to the north fully legalize adult use cannabis. In Canada, they're making it pretty easy to get a conviction. Up there, they're going the route of a pardon. So there's no paperwork, there's no waiting time, there's no fees for doing that up in Canada. Joe mentioned earlier some of the stuff that San Francisco is doing. They've got machine learning AI stuff that scours the records and says, this is a conviction that fits the criteria for expungement, and then it produces the paperwork for the people. Obviously, that's not how it works here, and lawyers cover your ears. I'm not against taking work away from lawyers if that makes this faster. Law enforcement argues, speaking in general, that someone should have a consequence for violating the law because the thing was illegal at the time. As I've just outlined, federal prohibition was based on racial animus, lies, and decades of misinformation and disinformation. So, obviously everyone makes mistakes. I think with cannabis, there's no reason to punish someone for the rest of their lives. So obviously, again, because this new industry here in Massachusetts is just taking flight, there are a lot of regulatory eyes on people seeking to enter it. There are certain mandatory convictions that, convictions that are mandatorily disqualifying for entering this industry. I think that is, again, sort of giving too much credit to, oh, it was illegal back then, so that they must be bad people. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kara and let her get into some of the nuts and bolts, but thank you for listening.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kara Rollins. My colleague, Jason Can, is here to talk a little bit about the actual details of Massachusetts record sealing and record expungement. So just a little bit of background about us. We work for a national law firm called Wilson, Elser, Moskowitz, Bowman, and Dicker, and we're litigators. We're not criminal attorneys, but we are in court every day arguing about arcane statutes such as this. So we feel pretty comfortable trying to explain it to people. And I just want to say thank you so much to the Massachusetts Recreational Consumer Council for inviting us to speak today. It's really an honor to be here. And I'm so inspired by their work. They've got such amazing energy and drive, and I think that they're a very important voice in this whole conversation. So we heard a couple previews about what the new record expungement and sealing laws in Massachusetts are, and when I actually started looking at the laws, I was surprised at how limited they actually are. And so before we even get into the details of it, I just want to point out that if this is something that is potentially applicable to you, there's a few considerations that you want to think about before you actually go and file anything with the court if you do have a criminal record. If you have any kind of immigration status other than citizen, you might want to stop and consult with a lawyer because criminal proceedings can affect your immigration status. Also, if you believe that one of your records may potentially be affected by the controversy surrounding Andy Dukin and Sonia Farrar cases where there was tampering with evidence, again, you may want to wait and talk to a lawyer and see what's happening with that, because I think that there's going to be some special consideration given to those particular records. If this stuff applies to you too, also, if you're going to get your records sealed and expunged, make sure that you gather all your records and keep good copies of it, because if they are expunged, great, but you may actually need the records in the future and they will be actually destroyed if they're expunged. And then finally, if you apply for this type of relief and you get denied, there is an appeal period and you want to seek legal help right away if your petition is denied, because you may be able to appeal it, but if you wait too long, your rights may be extinguished. So under the prior law, prior to this month actually, there was no expungement in Massachusetts whatsoever. If you had a criminal record, you could potentially seek a pardon, but this was a very, very limited type of relief, only in very, very particular cases where the governor actually has to grant you pardon. And there were provisions for sealing sealing records, but they were even more limited than they are now. And those have been expanded a little bit, but I think that this is really just one step in the direction of really needed reform. So in talking about sealing versus expungement, Blake touched on this a little bit. If you have your record sealed, that's kind of a good result. You know, you can tell people without being prosecuted for perjury, for employment, for government appointments, for government benefits, anything like that. You can actually say to people, I don't have a record if your record is sealed. However, if you ever get in trouble with the law again, the government, the courts, the police, they can all actually look at your sealed record. So there are definitely some benefits to expungement versus sealing. Now, expungement is severely, severely limited in Massachusetts. So, setting aside for the moment marijuana crimes that are no longer crimes, if we're just looking at people who have a criminal record, you're only going to be eligible for expungement if you are a youthful offender, or if you're a person with a record of conviction with very specific limitations on that, or if you have criminal records that didn't result in a conviction. So if you actually have an adult conviction, you're going to have to show that the offense took place before you were 21 years of age. If it's a felony, you will have to have waited 7 years since your period of incarceration or probation ended. And during that time period, you can't have any other offenses. In fact, for expungement in general, you can't have any other offenses. So if you have more than one criminal conviction, you're ineligible right off the bat. For misdemeanors, if you have one criminal misdemeanor conviction or record that the offense occurred before 21, then you just have to wait 3 years to seek expungement. So as I said, if you have any other criminal records whatsoever, this is going to be off the table for you. And this part about the traffic offenses, if you have anything beyond a $50 fine for a traffic offense, that's going to make you ineligible for expungement. And so $50 for a traffic offense, if you get a speeding ticket, if you're over, 10 miles an hour over the speed limit, it's going to be over $50. So there you go. Expungement's off the table for you. And then, of course, you have to have a certification that there's no active criminal investigation ongoing. There are certain criminal records that cannot be expunged. Some of these, make sense. It's a public policy decision. So if it is an offense that resulted in serious bodily injury or death, really anything involving guns, dangerous weapons, anything where the victim was an elderly person or a disabled person or a child, most sex offenses, and abuse and restraining order violations, those are all going to be not expungible. So here's actually a copy of the petition to expunge that's available. There's two different forms. This is the petition to expunge the non-marijuana crimes. So this is something where you have to fill it out and you actually send it to the Commissioner of Probation. The Commissioner of Probation has 60 days to determine whether you're eligible. Then they send it over to the DA's office, and the DA has to determine whether they want to object to it. If they do, they have to notify the Commissioner, who then sends it to the court and lets the court know whether there's any objection to the petition for expungement or not. And then if the DA objects, the court has to hold a hearing, and then the court has discretion whether to expunge the record or not. So even with the provision and this availability, and even with these narrow eligibility requirements, being under 21 when the offense occurred, only one offense, nothing else since then, it's still subject to the DA potentially objecting. There may be a situation where, victims are notified and victims object, and then it's up to a judge who still has discretion. So even if the judge, in their discretion, denies the petition, and you have a right to appeal, for the appeal, the standard of review for appeal is going to be whether the judge abused their discretion, and that's a really hard appellate standard to get overturned. So I'm just highlighting some of these issues because, as I said, it's great that expungement is now an option, but it's really, really limited. So there is this one section, Section 100K of the statute, which talks about exceptions to So for this provision, there is no waiting period, as with the other ones for the 3 and 7 year periods for misdemeanor or criminal convictions. So a court, for this provision, you don't actually have to go through the process with the Commissioner of Probation and the DA's office. The court can actually order expungement, again, subject to the court's discretion, but you've got to show by clear and convincing evidence that one of these situations applies, such as it was a identity theft situation, there was some kind of fraud on the court in terms of police misconduct, planting evidence, something like that, or the topic that's probably of most interest to this audience, an offense which is no longer a crime. So in that case, you would have to fill out a separate form, and actually that's part of the packet that's on everybody's chairs. So you would identify the court where your conviction was, you would identify what the conviction was that's no longer a crime. And one important thing to note with this is that whether it's a misdemeanor or a felony, the court's going to be looking at it at the time that you're seeking to get it expunged. So, for example, if you had an offense that was a felony at one point, and due to changes in laws, it's now a misdemeanor, the court's going to look at when you file your petition to expunge it as to whether it's a felony or misdemeanor. And again, here the court's going to have discretion. And then the effect of expungement is going to be really salutary for your future. You're going to be able to tell everybody that you have no criminal record, and in fact, there's going to be no criminal record to be found. They're actually going to be destroyed. And beyond that, the court or the commissioner has to inform the FBI and the United States Department of Justice that these records have been expunged, and request that the federal government also expunge the records. Whether they actually comply with that, remains to be seen, but we'll see. So now I'm going to hand this over to Jason, who's going to talk about the actual sealing of records.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jason Canny. I'm a lawyer at Wilson Elser with Kara. So I'm going to talk really briefly about sealing records. I know this is expungement week, but sealing records is another option for people who aren't able to expunge their records under these laws. They're pretty narrow, as you saw. So as Kara mentioned earlier, the difference between expungement and sealing. Expungement erases the records entirely. When you seal your records, it provides some level of confidentiality, so they can't be accessed by everyone. They can be accessed, in some cases, by law enforcement. They can be used in sentencing hearings for later convictions, but in general, they can't be accessed in other areas that they might come up. So the process for sealing your records, the first step obviously is to figure out whether you're eligible to have your records sealed. Once you figure that out, you can fill out the form, which I think you guys have a copy in the packet with you, and we'll show you another copy later. But it's similar to the expungement petition form. You fill out a petition form, you mail the form to the Commissioner of Probation, and then the Commissioner of Probation will make a decision and send you back a ruling on the decision. And if your petition is denied, and you feel like it shouldn't be denied, then obviously as soon as possible seek legal counsel to determine what the next best step should be. And it's really important to talk to a lawyer as soon as possible in that case, because you don't want to waive any rights to appeal that decision if you think that you're entitled to it. Okay, so as I mentioned, sort of the effect of sealing your records, it's confidential. It can be accessed by law enforcement. It cannot be used as admissible evidence in a later trial, but it can be used for sentencing. The most important part of it is that if you are applying for employment or housing or some sort of occupational and professional licensing, and they ask you whether you have a criminal conviction in the past, you can say no, you don't, as long as you have your records sealed. And it doesn't disqualify you from serving public service for the Commonwealth. Okay, so eligibility for sealing your records. So if you want to have your records sealed, there is a waiting period. It's 3 years for a misdemeanor, 7 years for a felony. What that means is it's measured from the time of the conviction or the time of release from incarceration, whichever is later. And starting at that day is when the clock runs, and you have to go basically 3 years for misdemeanor, 7 years for a felony, where you have no new convictions, except for the motor vehicle violation under $50, as Karen mentioned. So that's that waiting period, and the point of that is to show that you have law-abiding conduct for that period of time in order to get your record sealed. If you have a conviction for an offense that's been decriminalized, then you can file to have your record sealed immediately. And again, I think Kara mentioned this, a lot of this is a bit of an overlap with the expungement laws, but as Kara mentioned, the determination of whether it's a misdemeanor or a felony is considered at the time that you file the request for your records to be sealed, and not necessarily at the time the offense actually happens. So that has an effect on the 3 to 7 year period. And the 3 to 7 year waiting period is actually, it's new with the new laws. So previously, the waiting period was 5 years for a misdemeanor and 10 years for a felony. So that's really important to keep in mind if you are talking with someone, or if you are searching for some information on the internet, or you find a form. It's really important to keep track of that waiting period, because that's new, so there might be some outdated information still out there. There might be some forms out there that might have the wrong dates on them. So just make sure that you keep that in mind. And actually, I think in some of maybe in the form you guys have, the petition form, or ones we have up here, it still says the 5 to 10, or the 5 to 10 year waiting period. So just keep that in mind to make sure that whatever information you get, whoever you're talking to, is the most current and up-to-date information, because a lot of these things are new. So exceptions for the waiting period on the left there. So there's longer waiting periods if you have if you're convictions for restraining order violations, they're treated as felonies. So there's a longer waiting period, 7 years. Sex offense convictions, waiting period is 15 years. And then there are certain records, certain convictions that cannot be sealed, and that's from the right. So you have level 2 and level 3 sex offenses, and public justice crimes, firearm convictions, state ethics violations, bribery, perjury, witness intimidation, that stuff. So this is actually what the form, the petition to seal form looks like, and this form is what you would fill out. So like I said, the first step is to figure out whether you're eligible to have your record sealed, and then you would get a form like this, and you fill it out, and it's really important that you really understand what the form is, and you really understand what it is that you're filling out, because you have to sign it under the pains and penalties of perjury. So you don't want to be, there shouldn't be any confusion about what you're signing here, because you can get a lot of trouble, obviously, if you sign it and it's not accurate. So you want to really make sure that that everything that you understand what's going on here, and if you have any questions, it's important to reach out to a lawyer, legal services in any way to help you figure out that you are actually eligible for sealing your records, and that you're signing this form correctly. And this is what I mentioned. So down here, I don't know if you can see it or if it says it, but down here it'll say on the form that you haven't had any other, for the waiting period issue, which I mentioned earlier, it'll say whether you have any other convictions during the 3 or 7 year waiting period. And some of the older forms might still say 5 years or 10 years, so you want to make sure that it's correct, because you don't want to sign something under the pains and penalties of perjury if it's not accurate. So that's that. This is a form for a petition to seal. This is actually slightly different. So in some instances, if you have a criminal record, but there was no actual conviction, so you had a criminal record and maybe it was dismissed by the prosecutors or dismissed by the court, but there's still some sort of record and you want to have that sealed. There's a bit of a different form you have to fill out, and you have to sort of provide more reasons as to why it's necessary to have that sealed. And some of those reasons, you might want to provide some information about how the record might disadvantage you in some way, and how having it sealed might be a benefit for you. It just is a bit of a different process, and I think goes to the court for a judge to decide. Okay, and then this form here, it's actually a little bit different, so we can change that. I don't know if you want to talk about this.
No, I wanted to include this slide because this actually, Blake helped me out with this. This chart is from the Massachusetts regulation regarding recreational cannabis, and there are certain mandatory disqualifying convictions, as Blake mentioned when he was introducing us, or the topic. Some of them, they're not going to be expungible. If you have open criminal investigation, open criminal proceeding, that's a mandatory disqualifying issue. On the other hand, there are some things like if if you see MGL chapter, was it 94C, section 34, that relates to marijuana possession convictions. Those are automatically not considered mandatory disqualifying convictions. Those can be expunged, and they should be expunged, but that's not going to be a barrier to you actually working in the marijuana industry. But you can see from some of the listings of some of the felonies, especially those involving weapons, they can disqualify you from working in the cannabis industry, and some of them cannot be expunged. So there's sort of an overlap of things that can't be expunged and that would prevent you from working in the industry that you should be aware of. Again, like I said, the expungement provisions are very, very narrow. Yeah, so these are just a couple of resources. So the packets that the MRCC handed out on all your chairs came from the Greater Boston Legal Services. They have a lot of good resources on their site and through their organization about how to obtain your CORI report, your criminal records. If you want to start this process, you kind of have to do a little bit of background research yourself. You want to make sure that anywhere you've had criminal proceedings, you can go and get those records, get copies of them. And then the state government and the Commissioner of Probation, they have information also about the processes that you need to follow to get your records sealed or expunged. So, I don't know if anybody has questions. I know we threw a lot of information into a very short period of time, but we'll hang around too if you have specific questions that you don't want to ask in front of everybody.
How are the rules on other, if you're trying to expunge your record from other states? For instance, if you try to do a dispensary job in the state of Massachusetts, but you have something from previous states, how would you go about that? Contacting the DA's office from that state and then finding out their procedure? I'm sure each state has their own mechanism.
Yep, that's exactly right. So if you have a federal conviction, a record, or an out-of-state conviction or record, unfortunately you'd have to deal with that particular state. So if you lived elsewhere, you might have to actually go there, travel there, deal with their court system, and kind of hope that they have something to help you. Yes?
I was curious if you know what the fees associated are. I mean, do you have to you just send this form in, you have to open a court case or appear in court, or what?
Okay, yeah, so it depends. So if you file the petition to seal, that goes to the Commissioner of Probation, or the petition to expunge, that goes to the Commissioner. Those initially go to the Commissioner, not directly to the court. There's not a fee for those. There may be a hearing, particularly if the DA objects or if the court decides that they need to have more information about it. For the petition to expunge based on crimes that are no longer crimes or actions that are, decriminalized, that you have to file directly with the court, and there's going to be a hearing on that as well. There's no fee for filing that, but I think that the intention is that this is going to be something that people can do on their own without requiring a lawyer. As a practical matter, is that how it's going to play out? I'm not sure, because I know dealing with the court system can be very intimidating. The clerk's offices, at least mostly in Boston, and I know in some of the other counties, are just overwhelmed, and you can spend an entire day there if you have questions and you have to talk to a clerk and you don't know what to do. So I think it remains to be seen how practical this is going to be as a solution. Yeah. Sorry?
Let's do one last question, and then we're going to wrap up.
Get a copy of your criminal record. You go to the clerk's office. Is there a fee for that, or do you go to the clerk's office?
I am going to actually direct you to the Mass State Government website of the Greater Boston Legal Services. They actually have, on the Greater Boston Legal Services website, they have like a 2-page guide on how to obtain your CORI report. I think you can actually request it without actually having to go to court, but then to actually get the records, you would have to likely go to every single court where you have a record and get it directly from the clerk's office.
Does it cost money?
Copies are usually $1 per page for certified copies. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Wilson Elser. And thank you everybody. Thank you everybody who came out today. Everybody is out here. Everybody came here together today because we want to see a more just world. We want to see people get their lives back who have been incarcerated in the past. Obviously, we saw that there are many restrictions on the current expungement bill, the expungement law. It's a very long or it's a complicated process for the average person. And think about somebody who's been through, who has these systematic barriers to get through. So, but this is an important starting point for a conversation that we can have with our elected officials, that we need to make this bill stronger. And that's why we're here today. So MRCC, we're very big about civic engagement. We are all about you advocating for yourselves for what you want in your community. Because if we're not at the table, then we're on the menu. And if we're not there to give people what we want, to let people know what our interests are, then there are going to be others who make it for us. So what we really need in Massachusetts is stronger provisions for expungement, and we need automatic expungement for marijuana crimes, just like San Francisco and just like my mic went out. But the only way that this happens is if we are engaged in the system. The cannabis discussions are happening quickly in Boston specifically, and these conversations are going to be had at your civic association, your town civic meeting. So I encourage everybody to join your civic association meeting. And if you're interested in staying involved in this process of helping to strengthen the expungement laws, stay connected to MRCC. We will have more opportunities to get involved, whether we're pushing legislation or we're having events about raising the topic. And I want to thank you all again for coming out and giving your time to the people who have been harmed the most. Thank you. Hey guys, one more thing. Do you think that we could all get a picture, just everybody come together, and just remember this day so that next year we can come back and hopefully the law is stronger. Thank you.